then there's sort of this weird misunderstanding that I grew up with, that we lived in a non-political time, and nobody that I grew up with here, in, at least in Edmonton, was interested in politics. It was for old people with stuffy suits, and like that was just for nerds, if anything.
Mhm.
And nobody was engaged, and it was sort of like eye rolling to even bring the topics up that are now at the forefront of every single day of our lives, whether it's environmentally or human rights wise or whatever. And so I kind of felt like a freak before, but I feel now that, like, yeah, I wasn't wrong to be interested in those things.
To share all my toys. All the kids in the hood came to our sandbox and made enough castles for all the girls and the boys. But look where it's got me. Now I've been to that hard knock school. Nobody told me it's only when you're young that that's the rule. You gotta say mine, oh mine. Gotta say mine, mine and not yours. Yes, you gotta say mine, mine and not yours.
So thank you again for coming on the show. I've listened to your record, Mine All Mine, and I'm going to get into that much later. I'm really excited to talk about the themes that you have addressed and taken on in that song. But I want to go back. I think a good place to begin would be a portion of your bio that I read, which said you grew up in a household that encouraged critical thinking and challenged the status quo. I think that is a bedrock for which all of this conversation that we're going to have today is going to start from. So I want you to tell me a little bit more about your upbringing and basically that sentence, because I think it speaks volume.
Well, the good thing about this is that my parents are not on Instagram, so I can speak a lot more unfiltered because they're a little too old to, like, Facebook is still ready, let's just say, a bit of a challenge logistically with it. So, well, yeah, it's a blessing and a curse, But I think the older that I get, the more I realize it's a blessing to be somebody that learns how to be a critical thinker. The only thing about that is that when you do call things out, or you point things out, or you're not just super willing to be a sheep, that sometimes you know you feel kind of like an outsider, or um, troublemaker, or just somebody who's like, oh, are you really questioning this again? Or you, like, come on, just do the thing that everybody's doing. And yeah, I just can't, because yeah, my folks were people who they themselves sort of challenged within their own generation. They grew up in very, very strict conservative uh, religious upbringings.
Okay.
And so but they were also part of the um, counterculture, sort of like baby boomers, sort of 60s, 70s, mostly 70s, sort of, I don't know what you would call it, like the kind of people that would have gone to Woodstock.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
And
Okay.
and so they themselves view themselves as sort of like people who challenged the sort of conservatism of their own upbringing.
Mhm.
But then, of course, like if that stops there when you're a certain age and you just stop doing that, then you know now we're in a different time where those sort of views seem a little bit too simplistic, for the reality of probably the entire time. But
Mhm.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that the blessing and the curse of being like that is in your own children. So me, I went and like challenged it further. It's to the sense of like not being okay with just sort of like this shiny, like, oh, just give peace a chance, which is easy to say if you're from a privileged country that has nothing to really, or a place of privilege in a privileged country, then that's easy to say. But if
Uh-huh.
your only choice is to fight or die, not feed your kids or something, then so that kind of thing. I guess what I'm trying to say is, now in our time, now in 2021, now in the last few years, there have been a lot of things that I've not been able to not challenge
Hmm.
just because of growing up to having dinner conversations about political things my whole life.
Okay.
I don't know
Okay.
if that answers your question or not.
No, no, it does. I think we're no, no, fine. I think we're going somewhere with this. Just earlier today, I was reading some literature from Waldo Emerson, and he was talking about this idea that the artist essentially, with what you've just described, always pushes back on the notion that on the notion of conformity. The whole idea to conform is not within the nature of the artist, and I think that's what I find really interesting about you is that um, music takes a space or a tool. Music is a tool for you for which you can push back against certain norms and certain conformist type of ideas. So I'm going to ask, even with all of that idea of pushing back stuff, how did that intersect with music while you were growing up? How did you find music, or how did music find you?
Well, that's the other thing is that my parents had a vinyl collection, and um I was somebody who always wanted to listen to records. I think in part because we didn't grow up with TV. So like the entertainment was all audio. That and being able making your own, creating your own play, not being spoon fed entertainment that's all packaged and done already, but that you have to use your own imagination.
Yeah.
So I think being in the arts was just an extension of like always having to make things up to be occupied, your mind and your play being having to come from inside and not outside, if that makes
Mhm,
sense.
mhm.
And so that, and then, we didn't have a TV. And so I remember being 3 and being taught how to use the turntable just because every 20 minutes the side of a record's over and it was just basically self-serving. Like we don't want our 3-year-old to like turn the record over again, so it's like, here's how you do it so that you can just do it by yourself.
Yeah.
And and so I grew up with their record collection, and there's a lot of classical music, so that didn't really like speak to me in the same amount as more modern singer-songwriters, um, and some gospel records, some and things like that. So those, I think that, and a lot of those things, like I said, like my mom went to school in Chicago in 1968. So in the summer she was there and living in a neighborhood where like they had a curfew because of the uprisings, and so that, and then the records that she bought were African American gospel records, and so like those kind of things, like everything about the music that they had that wasn't classical music was political because the times were. And then there's sort of this weird misunderstanding that I grew up with, that we lived in a non-political time, and nobody that I grew up with here in, at least in Edmonton, was interested in politics. It was for old people with stuffy suits, and like that was just for nerds, if anything.
Mhm,
And nobody was engaged, and it was sort of like eye rolling to even bring the topics up that are now at the forefront of every single day of our lives, whether it's environmentally or human rights wise or whatever. And so I kind of felt like a freak before, but I feel now that, like, yeah, I wasn't wrong to be interested in those things,
yeah.
like.
Mhm,
And so I don't know, I just always thought like my favorite artists that I look up to the most aren't political because they're like, I would like to be a political artist. It's just they're in a world and a time and a place where politics affect you a lot.
yeah.
So it's going to enter into your writing and into your reality of what you experience and what your community is experiencing. And so it ends up in your song. You know what
Mhm,
I'm saying?
mhm. That's very interesting, though. So, no, I hear you, and we're going to talk about, because I think before I read your bio, I started listening to you, and what came to my mind, what came to my mind was that there was this existential pull in your and true to form, I read your bio and there's the word right there, existentialist gospel, which I'm like, oh my god, this is crazy. So we're gonna come there, but I still want to stay with this thread that okay, so there are two sides to the story that you've told me now. You were equipped based on how you grew up, with this notion that okay, we should kind of push back on certain conformist type of ideas, and also in a collecting records that had to do with politics and all of that stuff. um, I think the question would be what was that point, when you started making music? At what point did that actually sit with you? Was it experiential? Because up until this point, you would say, okay, these were kind of other people's experience. But at what point did it become so real to you, so tangible that it was something that you would actually devote yourself to?
Yeah, that's a good question because I don't think there was like a specific moment, you know.
Okay.
But as you get to know, like I lived kind of in a bubble, really, looking back on it now, of a pretty privileged, like sort of very safe, like not super affluent as far as first world countries go, a blue collar neighborhood, whatever. Still kind of gets a bad rap, that neighborhood, but um, but also like never worrying about my safety, never worrying about being bombed at night or gunshots in the street or anything like that. And
Yeah.
now I do. Now I do like um literally live in a really notorious neighborhood that has struggled a lot for historically for decades and decades, but now with the opioid crisis and a bunch of other things at play in the Alberta economy and um I don't know, it just unfortunately the perfect or most disastrous storm in a sense where like I just spent an hour talking to some nurses on the other side of my like right in my alley, like 15-20 meters from here, because of like yet another overdose that they were attending to on their bicycles, and just the funding that's been cut for things. It just like I can't here I cannot escape. I try, like I had other things I had to do today, and like time and time again I just don't get to them because there's some like an explosion or a gunshot or a fire or something, and I'm like, or somebody's literally dying and crying for help or something. So, um, you know, I moved here 13 years ago, so you could say maybe that was a turning point because moving in this neighborhood with that going on, you just have different thoughts because of what you see than if you're like watching people go to Starbucks and have a pumpkin latte, like. But I also will say that like it has to do with who you know too. Like if you have friends that are going through various kinds of oppression or frustrating experiences versus friends that aren't, that's those stories and those real life people that are in front of your face are going to make you think about things differently than if someone's like, oh, I ran out of shows on Netflix to watch or something, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I hear you.
My mama taught me to share all my toys. All the kids in the hood came to our sandbox and made enough castles for all the girls and the boys. But look where it's got me. Now I've been to that hard knock school. Nobody told me it's only when you're young that that's the rule. You gotta say mine, oh mine. Gotta say mine, mine and all yours. Yes, you gotta say mine.
So let's talk a little bit more about your current single, Mine Oh Mine. So the disconnect that you'd find, in the lyrics of the song, you speak about how one is raised, and then you get to a point where you actually get into quote unquote the real world, and find out that all that it is that we were, kind of taught, isn't how the real world operates. So, what do you think is responsible for that disconnection? Like, what do you think is responsible?
Oh man, that's such a good question. I mean, yeah, first of all, like growing up with people, a community and parents that were very idealistic, I don't think that's a bad thing. But you get into the real world and you start to see how pragmatic even especially politics can be, where people will be like, oh yeah, I totally believe in human rights because that's in fashion this week, but you know, or whatever. Well, now I don't because I need this vote, and like people just don't have a spine, like just whatever gets me the job, whatever gets me the money, like I'll just be a chameleon. It's fine. So I guess I've always had a hard time with that because I don't really think that is, I don't know, that's always bothered me. Even though I had to get kind of wise through it in music business a little bit, you know what I'm saying? I don't know. Like, I really think that there's a basic insecurity that way too many of us have, which is that you have to be successful. And successfully is determining, like now that we're talking about even the Olympics, like, oh, you just got a gold. Like, you didn't get gold, you got bronze. And like, bronze is still really good. Like, you're third best in the world. Like, I don't know, that's pretty good. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just we have this like level of excellence that we put pressure on ourselves and each other to achieve, and everyone else is a loser. Like even Trump is always talking about who's a loser and like using that kind of language all the time, right? And not that it's sorry to bring him up, he doesn't need any more attention, but like just that there's a mentality out there, unfortunately, that and especially economically, right? So we still all we're still always trying to measure ourselves against like the keeping up with the Joneses and trying to keep up with who's got more, and we never ever compare ourselves. I'm like, wow, I'm so glad I can afford food today. We're always like, oh, I can't afford to eat that fancy restaurant, and it's like, you got food, like that's better than a lot, like truly millions of people on the planet every damn day. So we're just always and so because we're always comparing ourselves to the people that have more and feeling sorry for ourselves, there's this sort of like, you got to do what you got to do to keep that stuff, and so I think the morality always takes us back seat to that. And now, especially even environmentally, we're being like, that's the only thing that may push us to start being truly more just, but not because we want to be truly more just, but because even rich people need to breathe air, and even rich people need to drink water, and not, but even the earth is telling us like, this way isn't very good, but we're just like so programmed, like talk about like how your first question of like critical thinking, like we don't even question that very thing that is fear-based existence, which is like, I have to get more and hold on to what I got, like that's an insecure thought.
Yeah, I hear you. So like I said, most of the ideas that you kind of lay out and go over through in your music or through your art form, I kind of share the same ideas. I always seek to understand the reason for hyper capitalist situations and consumerism and stuff like that. Um, of course, this platform wouldn't be enough to kind of explore all of the nitty gritty, but I want to talk about the music itself and the detail of the music. It's just so vivid, the picture that you paint with your words and your lyrics, and how when you're much younger, there's one set of rules, and then you grow up and find a different way to navigate the world. Before we come to how the music itself was made and the process of making the music, um, how do you think we can combat all of that? Like, how do you where do we go from here? Like, how does a child who learns one thing as an infant and becomes an adult and finds it's a different world, how do you think we get to reconcile ourselves and our identity based on how we get to navigate the world? How have you reconciled that?
Yeah, that's, well, man, I wish I had answers like that. I do think a lot of the anxiety that people feel is wanting to be a good person and then feeling like, well, if I am, then I'm gonna not win. I'm gonna lose, you know? And then there's sort of like these with tension between the two, the devil on our shoulder and with the angel on our shoulder, you know, and like, and even this neighborhood, I just see all these people like, you know, just doing horrible lethal drugs, and there just seems to be like, yeah, because I have no, like, I don't, you know, like, what do I do with myself? What do I do with all this pain and all this anxiety? And you know, I honestly think like we have to find the answers in security. Like we can provide security for each other, like the opposite of insecurity, you know, in that we have, if we have trusting relationships in our friends and in our family, in our communities, and in our coworkers, and basically just people that we know, that we interact with, even our neighbors. Like I wouldn't survive this neighborhood at all if I didn't trust my neighbors and they didn't trust me and we didn't look out for each other. We would call the police, they'll come in like 3 hours to fill out a report. And
Yeah.
it could be a report of a death, a shooting, or you know, like that's not that helpful. You know, it's my actual neighbors and the relationships that we have that keep me able to live here and keep my door open right now, you know? And so I guess what I'm saying is like that's what my neighborhood has taught me, that, you know, there's, as much as there's a lot going on here, compare the amount of suffering and the amount of crime and drug dealing that there is here, there's actually there is an order. Like it's not just chaos, you know. And that's because we actually have an ability as human beings to create like rural communities where it's not everybody can just be secure, really. Food security, water security, everything, like, but also emotional security, you know, like not always having to be against each other, like only one winner at the race and so everyone else is a loser. That is not a very secure feeling to have, you know, because that means only one person wins.
Yeah. I think you have articulated that very, very brilliantly. So, because there's this idea that there's only two default states, right? You're either a winner or a loser. And there's so much in the middle that people don't quite grasp. There's so much nuance that we don't even bother with. So I think that's a very good point. I also want to bring up the fact that I think I listened to an interview you had somewhere else where you were talking about, even just like you've mentioned, even in the chaos that is seemingly around you, there's still some, like, people are not necessarily one thing. Neighborhoods are not one thing. You know, even in the midst of chaos, there's still a certain level of order. And that's how, you know, people from the outside looking in should kind of approach, you know, even the provision of solutions, and not stereotyping neighborhoods as ghettos and stuff like that. That, you know, this is a complex problem that has resulted from one, you know, the failure of the society in many regards. And, you know, it's just a multi-layered problem. But to look at people as, you know, just a one-dimensional type stuff, you know, doesn't serve anybody any doesn't serve anybody any purpose.
No, like even today, the nurse that was out there was telling me how the other day she was, you know, trying to administer care to somebody who was overdosing, and and then somebody else was trying to bother her, and a drug dealer came with a machete, was like machete. But anyway, that's what she said, and chased the guy away. So he's like, "Don't you bother her," and he protected her while she was giving care. Like, but he was a like maybe that's it was his own client. I don't know. But like I don't know. Like that's the complications of this neighborhood, is that you see like you know, like you meet everybody and everybody's, you know, just everybody's got the two things on their shoulder, and is navigating them at all times. And some people just have less options, you know? And yeah, like what you said too. Yeah, and I also started to realize, like, to separate people from their behavior. You know, like we all make mistakes, but are we like wholly horrible because we made a couple of mistakes? You know, in a relationship or in a job or whatever, like then all of us are horrible. Like that's like I like to think that like part of being in a community too is that we learn from each other, and learn when you do make a mistake, it's not like you're written off and thrown into a pit forever, but like that you can learn from it. Like things I've learned the most in my life are from making mistakes, like, because the repercussions were big. So I remembered,
Mhm.
you know
Mhm.
what I mean? But they weren't so big that like I'm in jail or overdosing in an alley. But, other people, because of their circumstances, those mistakes will haunt them
Right.
more greatly, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. I hear you. So, like I said, there's just so much I would love to talk to you about. Time is always, in short supply here. But I want you to tell me about the body of work that you've put out, and just the process of creating it. Everybody Matters. That's the title of the album itself, and then Mine Oh Mine is a single from that body of work. But let me know the process of creating, how long it took, and just as an artist, what if the goal you set when you started the project, if at the end of it you were able to realize, lyrically and musically and stuff like that.
I think so. Like, yeah, this is the first album I really ever, no, that's not true. The second album I ever really produced myself. I produced one about just under a decade ago. But this one I started before the pandemic, and I started it musically. The idea that I had was I had been touring, but because my indie budget of touring didn't have my dream band of like a 10-piece soul band with horns and backup singers and everything, um, I just kind of had it like kind of very down to the skeletal bare bones of me playing keys, and then I had a Hammond organ player, not a real Hammond that we toured with because that's just logistically a nightmare, but a pretend Hammond organ and a backup singer. And so it was just the three of us, and so we're touring around doing that, and then at the merchandise table there would always be people saying, "Do you have an album that sounds like exactly what I just heard? Because I really like the concert." And I would be like, "No, I don't," because I had these fully produced albums that were in the studio, like how I heard them in my head, with backup vocals and, you know, like full rhythm section and everything. And so I was like, I should actually make an album that sounds like what I can afford to tour so that I can say yes next time instead of no.
Mhm.
So musically, that's really what I set out to do, and I decided to be very like strict with myself, with staying in the parameters of only having me on keys, either a piano or a Rhodes or a Wurlitzer, and then a Hammond organ,
Okay.
and I did my own background vocal singing, and we had sometimes like acoustic real drum kit and sometimes programmed drums, but like nothing else. I allowed myself nothing else, not even bass, so that all the bass lines are on the keyboard.
Mm.
and and that was my like rule for myself, just I don't know, just to see how to be creative within those parameters. And then so that's the music thing, and then like what we've been talking about this interview so far is just living here in this neighborhood has certainly made me face to face with things that had I lived in other neighborhoods I'm sure wouldn't have thought about multiple times a day, with the opioid crisis and with sex trafficking and just but at the same time living in one of the most desirable countries in the world to live in,
Yeah.
and then also being here on Treaty 6 land, which is still very disputed as to whether or not this really is my house and my yard, like, and having that be very prevalent in my mind all the time too. And now we've had, I mean, I've the whole thing coming up now with the mass graves being found has been a reality for many people that I know, and many people on the streets. That's not news to them,
Yeah.
and to many friends of mine, and thereby me, and so just kind of having that in the back of my mind all the time too, and seeing how that all plays out. Again, going back to like the sort of the hypocrisy of what we're taught versus what we walk, like, you know, and
Yeah.
just, yeah, just so that out of all that came this album. And then, of course, did I know that there was going to be a pandemic? No. Did I know that there was going to be George Floyd? I mean, I knew that there were many many, many, many versions of George Floyd? And did I know that there was going to be these mass graves found in Kamloops that suddenly seemed to be more important, like the tipping point in that way too? No, I didn't. So the album just became more relevant instead of like, even though I sat on it for like almost like a year and a half waiting to tour it, it just like became eerily more and more relevant every day that went by. I don't know. It was weird. It is weird.
Everybody matters, no matter who you are. Some dives start racing, some get life support. Yeah, everybody matters, so some a little more. 58 die here, 10,000 where it's full. Some make the headlines, others just the final door. Yeah, everybody matters, just some a little more. So you want to see things for all ways it won't work here. Don't like slavery, guess I'll call that over there.
I think it goes without saying that you're an incredible vocalist. I was going to come to the part of your creative abilities. I wanted to get the more heavy stuff out of the way of ideologies and philosophies, but I was driving this morning and you were playing really loud in the car, and it was as though I was in church. Your ability to bring that style of music into present day, with all of the social issues that you pack into them. I think it's very brilliant the way that you do it. Um, like I said, so what I was trying to get back to when we started this conversation was that, so I do have very strong opinions about how the world should work and how it should be and stuff like that. And I'm sure a lot of people do. But what is it for you? But what is it for you? Just like we've seen in both singles that you've put out right now, what is it for you that, you know, what is it for you that you can't sleep on, that you have to actually turn this into art? Because it's different from having a way you see the world and know that things ought to be better, but it's different. You could make a ton of other styles of music or write, what's commercially more viable or quote unquote appealing, but why is your art tugging at your soul this much that you have to write the way you do?
I guess because it's the only thing, like if I was a nurse, then I'd be out there being a nurse. If I was a social worker, I'd be out there being a social worker.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's all getting at the same thing, but I'm not like, and I've even posted about it on social media where I'm like, I just feel so helpless. Like there's literally people dying all around me every day. And I just singing, like it just like feels ridiculously stupid. It's like, you know, but at the same time, I'm like, well, so then I really feel like, okay, but that's what I can do. That's what I didn't go to, I'm not trained to be a social worker. I'd be so out of my lane, probably messing things up inadvertently more than helping if I suddenly just tried to be like, yeah, I know that better. I'm not a nurse. I fainted. Like I once fainted when I got a blood blister in my pinky. I'm not even joking. So nurse, that's out. Not, like, nope. So, what I do, so this motto that I have is rock what you got. I have literally even a registered hashtag of rock what you got, because that's what I got. I can sing and I know how to play music, and I went to school for that, and I've been studying it very seriously for a long time and always trying to push myself to be better. And so that's what I can do. And so I do it. And I literally every Sunday did 26, right here, if I just moved the phone a little bit that way, you would see my front porch. And
We're talking about your porch concerts?
yeah, so
Okay.
I had 26 concerts from April to October of last year when the weather was permitted on the front porch, and it's free concerts, and we had just anybody could come by. So we had a wide variety of people from very wide variety of walks of life, and including participating often in as performers. And then we're continuing it this summer as soon as the restrictions were allowing it again. And and then posting about stuff in the neighborhood all the time to try to bring awareness because a lot of people like just didn't know. And it kind of blew my mind because, like I said, I've been living here for so long. But, to a lot of people, I've had people tell me, because I've been going out now and doing concerts in other parts of the city this summer, and people are like, I just had no idea. Like, I had no idea. And so that's what I can do. That's like my little contribution of what I can, like, rock what you got, and that's what I got. So that's kind of how because otherwise I would just sit there in turmoil, but not doing anything about it, like for my own mental health, I have to say, like, I have to, like, doing something about it gives me some kind of like purpose to, other than just sitting here and worrying about it and being angry and being upset and being, yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm a doer.
I hear, no, that's good. That's good. That's a good way to put it. And so I'm a fan. Okay. I just want to say that I think when art is when art is delivered in the kind of way that you're doing it, right, in a very high quality, but driven by so much social driven message, I'm automatically a fan of that. I think it's important that the kind of message that you're sending out is heard by a lot of people. And when I heard the single, I just had to talk to you, because I'm like, who is this lady? She's actually it was remarkable what I heard, and that's why I couldn't wait to talk to you today. And I think we barely just scratched the surface of what you're about. But like I said, time is always in short supply here. But I have thoroughly enjoyed myself. I've gained a little bit more perspective into like what drives you and the kind of music you create. And of course, I really don't want to belabor the process of your talent, because that goes without saying. So what we're going to do is point people to go to your record on our page as best as we can, and tell people to go listen. And we're going to keep supporting you the best way we can. Just before I let you go, just let us know where we can find you, all the stuff that's coming up, and all the music that you currently have, where we can go purchase or buy or listen or stream or whatever. Just let us know.
Yeah, well, I guess you can find me on quite a few social media platforms, like here at Ann Vriend, is ANNVRIEND, which probably you can see in the thing, right?
Yes, yes.
And then my website, which is annvriend.com,
Okay.
has my music store on it. One of the things that I finally got around to do during the pandemic was setting up my own online store, which I'd meant to for like ever, but then I finally did. So you can now directly buy my music and some of my singles, and you can go there and check it out.
Good, good. It's been an honor to talk to you today. Like I said, we're gonna do the best we can to support your work and your music going forward. I love your stuff. Everybody who's watching this, go follow Ann, go follow her page, check out all the places that she has her music on. And we're gonna keep talking. I want to thank you for your time today.
Well, I just wanted to say, actually, back at you, is that my publicist was like, I think you're really gonna enjoy talking to this guy, because he asks really good questions. Like, some people just kind of read your bio and like, it says born in Vancouver. Oh, were you born in Vancouver? And you're like, yes. I don't know what else to say. Yes, there's an ocean there. Or like, there's nothing to say about it, So yes, she told me that I would enjoy talking to you, and she was not wrong. So.
Oh my, thank you so much. That means a lot.
Yeah.
We will keep talking for sure. But for now, I want to wish you a great rest of your day, and thank you so much for your time. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for having me and for taking the time to like check out the music thoroughly and be a great interview.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ann. Take care.
Yeah.